One moment of stupidity, one catastrophically poor choice. That's all it takes to transform ordinary people into cautionary tales that defy all logic, stark reminders that human foolishness knows no bounds. It was a quiet Saturday evening on December 6, 2009. In the small town of Konotop, Ukraine, Vladimir Likonos, a 25-year-old chemistry student, sat at his computer in his home while his parents were nearby, enjoying a peaceful evening. From a young age, Vladimir had been fascinated by science, particularly math, physics, and chemistry. His passion led him to study at a regional branch of the Kiev Polytechnic Institute, one of Ukraine's most prestigious technical universities. Vladimir had a peculiar habit. He liked to chew gum with a twist. He would regularly dip his gum in citric acid to enhance and prolong its flavor. It was something he did so often that it had become second nature to him. His friends and classmates knew him as a quiet, level-headed young man who spent most of his free time experimenting with various chemicals and even making homemade firecrackers. That fateful night, as Vladimir sat at his computer, he reached for what he thought was his usual citric acid to dip his gum into. However, on his table were two containers, one with citric acid and another containing an explosive powder he had been working with for his studies. In the dim light, or perhaps out of habit, Vladimir made a devastating mistake. He dipped his gum into the wrong container. Suddenly, a deafening explosion shattered the evening silence. The sound was so loud it echoed throughout the house. Vladimir's mother, hearing the blast, rushed to her son's room. What she found was a scene of horror. Vladimir lying on the floor, his face bloodied and disfigured. The explosion had blown off his entire jaw and most of the lower part of his face. When police arrived, they found approximately 3.5 ounces, 100 grams, of the explosive powder on Vladimir's work table. The substance looked remarkably similar to citric acid, but was actually an unidentified explosive compound. The scene was so disturbing that even seasoned police officers were shaken. Police spokeswoman Elvira Biganova later stated that it was an accident anyone could have made. A bomb squad was called to the scene, but the powder was deemed too volatile to move and had to be neutralized on site. Emergency services tried desperately to save Vladimir, but his injuries were too severe. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The investigation revealed that the explosive powder was approximately 4 times more powerful than TNT. Vladimir had unknowingly created a bomb in his own mouth. Local experts would later confirm that the substance he had mistakenly used was indeed a highly volatile explosive, far more dangerous than anyone could have anticipated. Vladimir's death sent shockwaves through the quiet town of Konotop. His friends remembered him as a brilliant student who was deeply passionate about his studies. He had just finished his semester exams and was home for the holidays. Irina Lisovskaya, deputy dean of the chemical engineering faculty, responded to the report saying, "He got an A in chemistry, but his grades in other subjects were average." Yes, Vladimir was not a poor student, but they don't teach how to make bombs at KPI. Vladimir Likonos' death serves as a stark reminder of how even the most mundane habits can turn deadly when combined with dangerous substances. His story, while shocking, highlights the importance of proper chemical safety and the devastating consequences that can occur from a single moment of confusion. Today, he rests in the Alexandrova Cemetery in Sumy, Ukraine, his grave marked by a single photograph, a reminder of a young man whose promising life was cut tragically short by one fatal mistake. It was January 27, 2018, at Nair Hospital in Mumbai, India. Rajesh Maru, a 32-year-old man from Lalbagh, had recently started a new job at a clothing shop in Parel. Today he wasn't at work, but was instead visiting the hospital to help his brother-in-law's mother, Laxmi Solanki, who needed an urgent MRI scan for suspected meningitis and pneumonia. What should have been a routine hospital visit would end in one of the most bizarre and preventable deaths you'll ever hear about. Rajesh was wheeling Laxmi on a stretcher with his brother-in-law Harish when they reached the MRI section. Anyone who's ever had an MRI knows the strict rules. No metal objects allowed. These machines use powerful magnets, thousands of times stronger than your refrigerator magnet, that can turn even small metal items into deadly projectiles. That's why there are multiple warning signs, metal detectors, and screening procedures. But here's where things went catastrophically wrong. As they approached the MRI room, Ward boy Vithal Chavan asked Rajesh to carry an oxygen cylinder inside. Yes, you heard that right. A metal oxygen cylinder into a room with one of the most powerful magnets on Earth. When Rajesh hesitated, Chavan reassured him that this was routine work and claimed the machine was switched off. It was a fatal lie. The moment Rajesh stepped into the room with the cylinder, the MRI machine's powerful magnet activated like a giant invisible hand, yanking the metal cylinder with incredible force. Rajesh, still holding on to the cylinder, was violently pulled along with it. The force was so strong that his hand became trapped between the cylinder and the machine. Police would later explain how the magnetic waves sucked in the cylinder, dragging Maru along with it due to his proximity to the trolley. In the chaos that followed, the cylinder's flow meter broke, causing liquid oxygen to leak directly onto Rajesh's face. His brother-in-law and the ward boy desperately tried to free him, but the magnetic pull was too powerful. During the struggle, Rajesh's left index finger was severed. By the time they managed to pull him away from the machine, Rajesh had inhaled a fatal amount of liquid oxygen. He was rushed to the trauma center, but it was too late. By the time they reached the emergency ward, he was already dead. What makes this death so mind-bogglingly stupid is that it was entirely preventable. The MRI room had multiple warning signs about magnetic fields, prohibited items, and restricted entry. The ward boy, who should have known better, gave dangerously incorrect information. The doctor on duty failed to supervise properly, and the metal door to the MRI room, which should have been closed, was wide open. Rajesh's relatives later lamented that while the ward boy's permission to carry the oxygen cylinder was the initial mistake, the tragedy could have been prevented if the metal door had been properly secured. In the aftermath, 3 people were arrested: Dr. Saurabh Lanjakar, ward boy Vithal Chavan, and attendant Sunita Survey, all charged with causing death by negligence. The hospital's MRI machine was shut down pending investigation, and the state government announced compensation of 500,000 rupees, or about $7,870 for Rajesh's family. To add insult to injury, Rajesh's severed finger remained stuck in the MRI machine for nearly 18 months before his family could retrieve it for proper funeral rites. Rajesh Maru's death stands as a stark reminder of how quickly things can go wrong when basic safety protocols are ignored. A perfect storm of negligence, misinformation, and physics that led to one of the dumbest and most preventable deaths in medical history. It was August 8, 2017, when Patricia Patty Thompson's lifelong Hawaiian dream became her worst nightmare at Waikiki Beach, Honolulu. At 52, this retired Ohio teacher had finally made it to paradise after decades of pinching pennies. Her late husband used to tease her about being too cheap for her own good, but Patty wore that badge with pride. She'd spent months planning this trip, hunting for every possible deal and discount. That morning, while scrolling through her phone over continental breakfast, Patty discovered what she thought was the ultimate Hawaiian hack. Fresh coconuts at the hotel gift shop cost $12 each, but according to a 3-minute YouTube video she'd just watched, they were completely free if you knew how to harvest them yourself. Energized by her new knowledge, Patty glanced out at the palm trees swaying just beyond the hotel patio. Surely, she thought, it couldn't be that difficult to grab a coconut or two. But as she made her way through the lobby, she started to notice just how seriously the Hilton Hawaiian Village took coconut safety. The hotel had plastered warning signs everywhere about falling coconuts. Yellow caution tape surrounded several palm trees. Staff members had verbally warned guests during check-in, and every room came with a safety pamphlet. Patty had tossed hers straight into the trash without a second glance. At 10:30 a.m., armed with her selfie stick and an overconfident attitude, Patty marched toward a towering 40-foot coconut palm loaded with mature fruit. Despite the clearly posted warning signs, she dismissed them as nothing more than overly cautious hotel liability measures. Having grown up on a farm in Ohio, she believed she was perfectly capable of handling herself around falling objects. Positioning herself directly beneath the tree, Patty held up her phone to document her free coconut adventure for Facebook. She could already imagine the jealous comments from her former teaching colleagues back in Cleveland. Above her head, 3 coconuts, each weighing roughly 3 pounds, had been loosened by recent tropical winds. As Patty heard the ominous cracking sounds, any reasonable person would have stepped away. Instead, she spread her arms wider, convinced she could catch multiple coconuts simultaneously. like a circus performer. The first coconut plummeted from 35 feet and slammed into the ground just inches from Patty's feet, sending a sharp crack through the courtyard. Dirt and small shards of husk sprayed her legs, but instead of taking it as a warning, she laughed it off and stepped closer to the trunk. Emboldened, she looked up and shouted, daring the tree for more. The second coconut sealed her fate. Falling from the same height, it struck the back of her skull with approximately 1,000 pounds per square inch of force. The impact created a depressed skull fracture, driving bone fragments directly into her brain tissue. Massive intracranial bleeding began immediately, as her brain started swelling against the confines of her skull. The third coconut hit her spine as she collapsed, but the damage was already done. Patty lay unconscious on the sand, her selfie stick still clutched in her hand, as horrified beachgoers rushed to help. Within 4 minutes, brain herniation had claimed her life. Paramedics arrived quickly but could only pronounce her dead at the scene, her phone still recording the tragic final moments of her bargain-hunting adventure. The hotel responded immediately, installed additional warning barriers, implementing daily coconut removal services, and requiring all guests to attend a mandatory safety briefing. It was April 1988 at the Franklin County Sports Parachute Center in North Carolina. Ivan Lester McGuire, a 35-year-old expert skydiver with over 800 successful jumps under his belt, was gearing up for what should have been another routine day of filming student jumpers. As a skilled parachutist and videographer, he'd done this countless times before, carrying his camera equipment to capture the thrilling moments of first-time skydivers. His reputation in the skydiving community was stellar. He was known for his attention to detail and his passion for capturing the perfect shot of newcomers experiencing their first taste of freefall. On this particular day, McGuire was preparing to film a student and an instructor from the center. He was tired from previous jumps but determined to get the perfect shot. As he boarded the plane with his video equipment, something was terribly wrong. Something that wouldn't become apparent until it was far too late. The plane climbed to an altitude of 10,500 feet. McGuire, focused on getting his camera equipment ready, went through his usual pre-jump routine. The student and instructor were ready, and when the moment came, they all jumped from the aircraft. The cool air rushed past them as they began their free fall, with McGuire filming the entire descent. But as they approached the moment when parachutes should be deployed, something horrifying dawned on McGuire. The camera attached to his helmet captured what would become his final moments. In a chilling revelation, he reached for his ripcord only to realize there was nothing there. In his focus on the filming equipment, he had forgotten to put on his parachute. The voice-activated camera recorded his last desperate moments. Investigators who later reviewed the footage reported hearing what sounded like, "Oh no," just after McGuire's left hand came into view, frantically searching for a parachute that wasn't there. The camera continued recording as the ground approached at 150 miles per hour, capturing McGuire's final descent. The Federal Aviation Administration launched an investigation into the incident, particularly focusing on whether pilot Mark Luman had checked if McGuire was wearing a parachute before takeoff. FAA Inspector Walter Rigsby pointed to Regulation Number 105, which clearly stated that no one may jump unless the pilot checks their parachute. But somehow, on this day, an experienced skydiver had boarded a plane without the most crucial piece of equipment. Investigators believe that McGuire's fatal mistake might have been due to fatigue or his preoccupation with the video equipment. The weight of his camera gear, similar to that of a packed parachute, might have fooled him into thinking he was properly equipped. Nancy Fayard, the wife of the parachute center's owner, later stated, "No one was aware that he got on the plane without a parachute. Of course, no one knew or they would have stopped him." The investigation ruled out suicide, concluding this was simply a tragic accident, a momentary lapse in judgment that cost McGuire his life. His body was found about 1.5 miles from the airfield he had taken off from, a grim reminder of how even the most experienced professionals can make fatal mistakes. McGuire's death sent shockwaves through the skydiving community. Here was a man who had completed hundreds of successful jumps, who knew every safety protocol by heart, yet had somehow forgotten the most basic and essential piece of equipment. It was a stark reminder that no matter how routine something becomes, one moment of distraction can have devastating consequences. The incident led to significant changes in pre-jump protocols across the country. Many skydiving centers implemented mandatory equipment checklists and buddy systems, where jumpers would cross-check each other's gear before boarding. The tragedy also sparked discussions about the dangers of complacency in high-risk activities, and the importance of maintaining focus regardless of experience level. Today, Ivan McGuire's story serves as a sobering lesson in skydiving schools across the country. His death led to stricter pre-jump safety checks and a renewed emphasis on the importance of following basic safety protocols, no matter how experienced the jumper might be. In the end, McGuire's final jump became a tragic reminder that in skydiving, as in life, there are some mistakes you only get to make once. It was September 23, 2017, at the Plas Talgarth Holiday Complex near Machynlleth, Wales. Elizabeth Isherwood, a 60-year-old former policewoman from Wolverhampton, had just arrived for what should have been a relaxing week-long getaway. Known as Mary to her friends and family, she was visiting the timeshare one final time before the family sold their share. Little did she know that this vacation would end in one of the most horrifying and bizarre deaths imaginable. Elizabeth was fit and active for her age. She played golf regularly, cared for her grandchildren, and worked part-time as a carer. Her life had been full and varied. She'd been a police officer, a teacher, and even worked for the post office before moving to New Zealand for a decade. Now, back in the UK, she was enjoying her golden years surrounded by family. That first night at the holiday apartment, Elizabeth went to bed without even unpacking her suitcase. In the middle of the night, she got up to use the ensuite bathroom. What happened next was a tragic sequence of events that would lead to her death. In the darkness, disoriented and naked, Elizabeth mistakenly walked into the airing cupboard instead of back to her bedroom. The door closed behind her, and when she tried to open it, the door handle broke off in her hand. She was trapped in a space barely larger than a phone booth, with no light and no way to call for help. What followed was a desperate struggle for survival that lasted nearly 2 days. Using remarkable strength and determination, Elizabeth broke off a copper pipe inside the cupboard and used it as a tool to try to break through the walls. She managed to claw through brickwork and plaster, creating a hole almost large enough to escape through. She had made a hole big enough to climb through, her son Craig later explained, but didn't realize her way out was only blocked by a picture screwed to the other side of the wall. In a cruel twist of fate, the broken pipe began spraying cold water throughout the tiny cupboard. As Elizabeth continued her frantic efforts to escape, she became soaked. With no clothes and no way to dry off, hypothermia set in quickly. The very tool she was using to try to save herself was contributing to her death. Throughout her ordeal, Elizabeth's cries for help went unheard. A couple in a neighboring apartment later reported hearing banging noises, but assumed it was maintenance work. They had decided they would report it if it continued after 5 p.m. But the sounds stopped just after 5, likely when Elizabeth became too weak to continue. For a full week, no one knew anything was wrong. It was only when maintenance staff came to investigate a water leak that they made the grim discovery. They found Elizabeth's body in the airing cupboard, her clothes and suitcase still untouched in the bedroom. The coroner ruled her death as misadventure, concluding she died of hypothermia after becoming trapped. Her son Craig was devastated, describing his mother as fit and healthy with years of a very happy life ahead of her. The tragedy prompted Craig to sue McDonald Resorts, the owners of the holiday complex, alleging negligence in maintaining the door handle. "This should never have happened," he said. "I just want the company to admit they made a mistake and make sure this cannot happen to anyone else." Elizabeth's story is a chilling reminder of how quickly an ordinary situation can turn deadly. A simple wrong turn in the night, a faulty door handle, and a series of unfortunate circumstances combined to create a nightmare scenario that ended in an unimaginable death, alone, cold, and trapped just inches away from freedom. It was May 5, 2020, when 22-year-old Reuben "Rubes" Taylor made his final attempt at internet fame in an abandoned cement factory in Detroit, Michigan. Rubes and his crew had built a modest following, creating extreme dare videos, each stunt more outrageous than the last. Their channel specialized in dangerous challenges that pushed the boundaries of common sense, attracting viewers who craved increasingly reckless content. Their latest brainstorm seemed simple enough: fill an old bathtub with wet cement, and challenge each other to bathe like living statues. The abandoned factory provided the perfect backdrop of industrial decay they craved for their aesthetic, with crumbling walls and rusted machinery, creating an apocalyptic atmosphere. What they lacked was any semblance of planning or safety consideration. No exit strategy, no safety measures, no understanding of how quickly cement sets once mixed with water. Rubes volunteered to go first, boasting about being invincible and mildly cement-proof, whatever that meant. His friends had tried talking him out of more dangerous stunts before, but Rubes always insisted he knew what he was doing, and that danger was just part of the game. The group discovered an old industrial cement mixer on site, a massive rusted beast that had been abandoned for years. They rigged it with a makeshift lever system using metal pipes and rope to pour directly into the bathtub they'd dragged inside from a nearby demolition site. The setup looked precarious, but they were more concerned with camera angles than structural integrity. As Rube stepped into the tub wearing only swim shorts and lowered himself down, his friends positioned multiple cameras around the scene and shouted encouragement about statue mode being activated. The anticipation was electric as they prepared to capture what they believed would be their most viral moment yet. The first friend pulled the lever, but the rusted mechanism jammed halfway. When another grabbed a metal pipe to force it loose, applying significant pressure, the chute suddenly swung completely open. Nearly 300 pounds of wet cement surged into the tub instantly, engulfing Rubes up to his shoulders in mere seconds. Before anyone could process what happened, cement continued flowing and spilled over his face, sealing around his mouth and nose as it began its rapid curing process. The mixture was thicker than expected, immediately restricting his breathing. Rube struggled briefly, but couldn't inhale or signal clearly through the thickening mixture that muffled his desperate attempts at communication. Panic set in as his friends tried scooping cement away with bare hands, their fingers scraping uselessly against the hardening surface. The cement was setting faster than anyone anticipated. By the time someone found a hammer and began chipping frantically at the edges, Rubes had already suffocated beneath the concrete tomb of his own making. Emergency responders arrived too late despite frantic calls. The bathtub required industrial jackhammering equipment to retrieve his body, the cement having cured completely around him, like a grotesque sculpture. What started as another wild stunt for social media views ended with a young man's life cut short by a combination of poor planning, mechanical failure, and the unforgiving nature of industrial materials. The abandoned factory that provided their perfect aesthetic backdrop became the scene of a tragedy that no amount of likes or shares could undo. Rubes' final video was never uploaded, but the story spread anyway as a cautionary tale about the deadly pursuit of viral fame. His friends were left traumatized, forever haunted by the sound of cement hardening and their inability to save him from his own reckless ambition. It was August 2014. A chef named Pung Fon, who worked in Guangdong province in China, tragically died in an unusual way. Pung was preparing a dish that included the meat of an Indo-Chinese spitting cobra, a snake known for its deadly venom. This dish is considered a delicacy in some parts of Asia. That day, Pung had already severed the snake's head and was busy preparing the rest of its body to cook a soup. The snake's head was set aside as Pung focused on his work. About 20 minutes later, Pung went to throw the snake's head into the trash, thinking it was no longer dangerous, but to his shock, the severed head suddenly bit his hand, injecting him with venom. The venom of the Indo-Chinese spitting cobra is extremely powerful. It contains neurotoxins that attack the nervous system, causing paralysis and eventually stopping the victim from breathing. In Pung's case, the venom started affecting him almost immediately. He had no time to react or get help before his respiratory system began to shut down. The diners in the restaurant were enjoying their meals, unaware of what was happening in the kitchen, but then they heard loud screams and a lot of noise coming from the back. Restaurant guest Lin Sun, who was there celebrating his wife's birthday, later described the chaos. "We were eating when suddenly there was a lot of noise. We didn't know what was going on but could hear people screaming from the kitchen." Realizing something was terribly wrong, the restaurant staff called for a doctor. Unfortunately, by the time medical help arrived, it was too late. Pung Fon had already died from the venom. The speed at which the venom worked left little time for anyone to save him, and without anti-venom, there was nothing that could be done. A police spokesman spokesman described the event as a highly unusual case, explaining that once the venom took hold, there was no chance of saving Peng's life. Only the anti-venom could have helped, but it wasn't given in time. It was just a tragic accident. Experts later explained how this could happen. Yang Hongchang, a snake expert with 40 years of experience, said that reptiles, including snakes, can still move for a short time after their body parts are removed, or even after they are decapitated. When a snake's head is cut off, it's technically dead because its basic body functions stop, but reflexes can still happen, he said. This means that even after being killed, the snake's head can still bite and inject venom, which is exactly what happened to Peng. The Indo-Chinese spitting cobra, the type of snake Peng was handling, is especially dangerous because of its venomous bite and its ability to spit venom with great accuracy. This snake's venom can cause severe damage and even death, as seen in Peng's case. Despite being decapitated, the snake's reflexes allowed it to bite and kill Peng, showing just how dangerous these creatures can be even after death. In some parts of Asia, snake meat is believed to have health benefits, and it is often used in traditional medicine. In Guangdong province, where Peng worked, snake meat has been eaten for centuries and is considered a delicacy. It is believed to cure various ailments and strengthen the body. This belief, however, doesn't eliminate the very real dangers involved in preparing and consuming such dangerous animals. The restaurant where Peng worked was left in shock after his death. The diners who were there that day will likely never forget the tragedy that unfolded in the kitchen. What began as an ordinary meal ended with the sudden loss of a life. It was 2010 in Sydney, Australia. Sam Ballard, a 19-year-old rugby player with a promising future ahead of him, was hanging out at his friend Jimmy Galvin's house. The group of friends were having what they called a red wine appreciation night, trying to act mature as they sipped their drinks on the patio. But one simple dare would transform this ordinary evening into the beginning of a tragic 8-year nightmare. As the friends chatted and drank, a garden slug crawled across the concrete patio. Someone at the gathering posed what seemed like a harmless question. Should I eat it? Before anyone could really think it through, Sam, young and fearless, picked up the slug and swallowed it. The friends laughed it off, and the night continued as normal. None of them could have imagined that this split-second decision would lead to devastating consequences. A few days later, Sam started feeling strange. He complained of severe pain in his legs, followed by bouts of vomiting and dizziness. His mother, Katie Ballard, initially worried that he might have multiple sclerosis, a condition that had affected his father. But when Sam mentioned eating the slug, she dismissed it, saying, "No one gets sick from that." She couldn't have been more wrong. The truth was far worse than anyone could have anticipated. The slug Sam had eaten was carrying rat lungworm, a parasitic worm that typically lives in rodents, but can infect slugs and snails when they eat rat droppings. When humans become infected, the parasite can cause a severe form of meningitis called eosinophilic meningoencephalitis. In Sam's case, the infection was catastrophic. The parasites had made their way to Sam's brain and spinal cord, triggering a devastating inflammatory response. His condition deteriorated rapidly, and he fell into a coma that would last for 420 days. More than a year of his young life lost to darkness. When he finally woke up, the damage was severe and irreversible. The once athletic rugby player was now a quadriplegic, unable to eat without a feeding tube or move without intense effort. Sam required round-the-clock care 7 days a week. His mother, Katie, watched as her son, who she had always thought of as invincible, struggled with the most basic functions. He couldn't regulate his body temperature, suffered from seizures, and needed help with everything from eating to using the bathroom. The National Disability Insurance Scheme initially supported Sam with a $492,000 care package, but this was later slashed to just $135,000, though public outcry helped restore the funding. Despite the tragedy, Sam's friends never abandoned him. They called themselves Team Ballard and regularly visited, helping him watch rugby matches and occasionally sneaking him a taste of beer when his mother wasn't looking. Jimmy Galvin, the friend who hosted that fateful night, carried the weight of that evening heavily. He later apologized to Sam for not stopping him from eating the slug, and Sam's response was to burst into tears, showing he was still very much present mentally despite his physical limitations. For 8 years, Sam fought against the devastating effects of that one impulsive decision. His mother, Katie, remained by his side, later sharing on Facebook how the incident had devastated, changed his life forever, changed my life forever. The impact is huge. On November 2nd, 2018, at the age of 28, Sam finally succumbed to complications from his condition. His last words to his mother were, "I love you." Sam died at Hornsby Hospital, not far from where he grew up, surrounded by 20 of his closest friends and family members. His friend Jimmy later said the room was full of love during Sam's final moments. The young man who had once been full of life and promise had spent his final 8 years as a cautionary tale about how a seemingly harmless dare can have devastating consequences. Today, Sam Ballard's story serves as a sobering reminder of how a single moment of thoughtless bravado can change everything. While most people who contract the parasite recover without incident, Sam's case shows how devastating the consequences can be when things go wrong. His story continues to be shared as a warning to others that some dares aren't worth taking, no matter how harmless they might seem at the time. It was October 31st, 2024. Diwali night brought light and laughter to Bengaluru, India. Amidst the celebrations, however, one group of friends witnessed a tragic turn of events, an example of the dangers that could arise from reckless decisions. In the middle of the festivities was 32-year-old Shabarish, a construction worker known for his friendly nature. After a long day at work, he eagerly joined his friends to celebrate. Shabarish, who led a modest life, valued his time with loved ones. That night, encouraged by the energy of the festival and a few drinks, his friends presented him with a daring challenge. They offered him a new auto rickshaw if he would sit on a box of lit fireworks and let them explode beneath him. For Shabarish, who owned very little, this was a tempting offer. At around 9:30 in the evening, Shabarish accepted the dare, likely not fully aware of the risks. CCTV footage captured the event as the fireworks went off beneath him, leading to a powerful explosion that knocked him to the ground. His friends, stunned by what had happened, rushed him to Victoria Hospital, hoping he could recover. However, his injuries were severe, with extensive burns across his lower body. Shabarish fought for his life in the hospital over the next couple of days. His mother, Vijaya, first heard about the incident through one of Shabarish's friends, who vaguely mentioned he'd been hurt while handling fireworks. At the time, she had no idea about the real cause of his injuries as she watched her son suffer. On November 2nd, Shabarish succumbed to his injuries. The severe burns had taken an irreversible toll. As his family made arrangements for his funeral, they finally learned the truth of what had happened. CCTV footage revealed the role his friends played in pushing him toward the dare, and Vijaya was devastated to learn they had misled her initially, making her believe it was an accidental injury. Authorities quickly put together the details of the night. Deputy Commissioner of Police Lokesh Jagalasar reported that 6 friends who had encouraged Shabarish to perform the dangerous stunt were arrested and charged with culpable homicide. The tragic events resulted from a mix of alcohol, poor judgment, and peer pressure. What began as a daring challenge with the promise of an auto rickshaw ended in a tragic loss, deeply impacting Shabarish's family. The incident was captured on a CCTV camera installed at one of the buildings. Vijaya told a local newspaper, "I was shocked to see the footage and realized that the youths had lied to me." According to Vijaya, Shabarish had gone to work as a construction worker and returned home for the Diwali celebration. "I wish he had stayed away for a few more days," lamented the mother. "At least he would have still been alive." Shabarish's story is one among many, as accidents involving fireworks frequently spike during Diwali in India. Although the season brings joy for many, it often leads to unfortunate incidents, sometimes with fatal outcomes. Shabarish's family now faces the painful aftermath of his loss. Vijaya initially trusted the young men who were with her son that night, believing their story about an accidental injury. Now she wishes her son had avoided the Diwali festivities altogether. This tragic dare turned a night of celebration into a heartbreaking event, showing how easily festivities can spiral into disaster when poor decisions are made under the influence of alcohol. For Shabarish, the promise of a new auto rickshaw and the possibility of a better life clouded his judgment, leading him to a fatal choice. It was March 18, 2018, in Tempe, Arizona. The evening was clear as 49-year-old Elaine Hertzberg crossed a 4-lane road with her bicycle. At 9:58 p.m., the unthinkable happened. An Uber test vehicle operating independently in autonomous mode struck Elaine at 39 miles per hour. She died from the impact immediately. Countless and lengthy investigations were carried out to understand what went wrong. The U.S. National Transportation Safety Board, together with local police, searched for details of the crash that occurred on that fateful evening. All their findings pointed to human error as the primary cause. Rafaela Vasquez was in the driver's seat and was supposed to watch the vehicle as a human safety driver. However, investigations later revealed that Vasquez was not paying full attention to the road at the time of the accident. Dashcam footage released by the police showed Vasquez looking down for several seconds while the car was traveling at 39 miles per hour. She had been streaming an episode of the television show The Voice. Despite this, Vasquez pleaded not guilty to any charges related to the accident and was released to await trial. Further complicating the situation, records from the streaming service Hulu indicated that Vasquez's device had been streaming that particular show at the time of the crash. Additionally, the autonomous vehicle itself had shortcomings. Its automatic systems failed to recognize Elaine and her bicycle as a potential threat that could lead to a collision, a critical malfunction in a technology designed to prevent such incidents. Adding to the concerns, just days before the accident, an employee had already raised issues with the vehicle's safety to the company's leaders. The employee expressed worries that the vehicles were frequently involved in accidents and questioned whether the operators, like Vasquez, were adequately trained to handle these advanced systems. These warnings, however, did not lead to any immediate action, and sadly, the fatal crash occurred, raising serious questions about the overall safety and reliability of autonomous vehicles. The police report issued in June 2018 concluded that the fatal collision could have been entirely avoidable if Vasquez had been monitoring the road. This incident sparked discussions about the safety protocols for autonomous vehicles and the crucial role that human operators play in ensuring these technologies do not pose a risk to public safety. After the incident, the state of Arizona took decisive action by suspending Uber's ability to test self-driving cars on its public roads. This move reflected growing concerns about the safety of autonomous vehicles. In response to the suspension and ongoing safety concerns, Uber ended all its autonomous vehicle tests in Arizona. However, Uber later managed to regain permission to conduct these tests in California, starting earlier in 2020, signaling a cautious continuation of their development of this technology. In July 2023, Rafaela Vasquez pleaded guilty to endangerment. This plea was a key moment in history, as it was the first time a crash involving a fully autonomous car resulted in a criminal conviction. Rafaela initially told police that she hadn't seen Elaine before the crash, claiming that Elaine came out of nowhere on a dark street in Tempe. Initially charged with negligent homicide, Rafaela eventually reached a plea agreement with prosecutors. The judge overseeing the case accepted Rafaela's plea and sentenced her to 3 years of supervised probation. Elaine Hertzberg's death marked a turning point in the development of autonomous vehicles, forcing companies to reconsider their safety protocols and the public to question the readiness of this technology for our roads. It was March 27, 2009 in Long Beach, California. The morning air carried that distinctive mix of salt and diesel that's familiar to anyone who spends time at sea. For Jeff Twaddle, a 54-year-old deckhand with weathered hands and a quick smile, it was just another day aboard the charter boat Gale Force. But this ordinary Friday would end in one of the most bizarre tragedies the local maritime community had ever witnessed. The Gale Force, a 55-foot vessel captained by Dan Salas, had been chartered by the Los Angeles Unified School District for an educational fishing trip. About 20 elementary school students boarded that morning, their excited voices filling the air as the boat pulled away from Rainbow Harbor. These trips were routine, a chance for city kids to experience the ocean, learn about marine life, and try their hand at fishing along the breakwater. Jeff had been working on charter boats for years. With his friendly demeanor and patient nature, he was particularly good with children. He knew how to ease their fears about handling bait, how to help them cast their lines, and most importantly, how to make them laugh. That ability to entertain was a valuable skill on a boat full of young students, some of whom had never been on the water before. As the morning progressed and the fishing began in earnest, Jeff moved about the deck, assisting students and keeping spirits high. The fish weren't biting particularly well that day, and some of the children were growing restless. That's when Jeff decided to perform a little trick, something he'd probably done before to amuse passengers. In a fateful moment that would prove catastrophically misjudged, Jeff grabbed a bait fish from the bucket and, with a playful flourish, popped it into his mouth. It was meant to be a silly gag, something to make the kids giggle and refocus their attention. But within seconds, the situation turned dire. The fish became lodged in his throat, blocking his airway completely. The children watched in confusion, then horror, as Jeff's expression changed from playful to panicked. He began to choke, his face reddening as he struggled for breath. The other crew members quickly realized something was terribly wrong and rushed to his aid. Jeff collapsed on the deck as his colleagues desperately tried to dislodge the fish from his throat. It sounds like he was trying to be light-hearted and make the students laugh when he put the fish in his mouth. Long Beach Fire Department Battalion Chief Frank Hayes would later tell reporters, his voice somber as he recounted the tragedy. Despite frantic efforts to perform CPR, Jeff remained unresponsive. The boat made an emergency return to the harbor where paramedics were waiting, but by then, precious minutes had elapsed. Jeff was rushed to St. Mary Medical Center, but doctors couldn't save him. He was pronounced dead at 1:15 p.m., less than 2 hours after his playful stunt had gone so horribly wrong. The Los Angeles County coroner later confirmed what witnesses already knew. Jeff had died from aspiration of fish, a cause of death so unusual that it made headlines across the country and even internationally. Captain Salas, visibly shaken by the loss of his crew member, told the Press Telegram it was a tragic freak accident that had left everyone aboard the gale force devastated. For the elementary school students who witnessed the incident, what should have been an educational adventure became a traumatic experience. The school district immediately sent notes home to parents explaining the tragic event and offered grief counseling for the children. Jeff Twaddle's death serves as a stark reminder of how quickly life can change, how a simple joke, a moment intended to bring joy, can unexpectedly turn fatal. 1 minute he was performing for laughing children. The next he was fighting for his last breath on the deck of the boat where he had spent so many days. In the annals of bizarre and unexpected deaths, Jeff's story stands out not just for its unusual nature, but for the ordinary circumstances in which it occurred. A regular day on the water, a simple attempt to entertain, and a fatal outcome that no one could have possibly predicted. It was April 2014 in St. Petersburg, Russia. The night air was crisp and cold, the kind that makes your breath visible in small clouds. Most people were tucked away in their homes, but 17-year-old Zhenya Ignatieva saw the darkness as an opportunity. An amateur photographer with dreams bigger than her experience, Zhenya had recently purchased a new camera with money from her summer job. Tonight, she was hunting for the perfect shot, one that would capture not just an image, but the thrill of danger itself. The railway bridge in the Krasnogvardaysky district stood like a steel giant against the night sky. Rising 30 feet above the concrete below, it was exactly the kind of dramatic setting Zhenya was looking for. She imagined the train tracks fading into darkness, creating a striking image that would impress her friends and followers. What she didn't realize was that this search for the perfect photo would cost her everything. Zhenya wasn't alone that night. Her friend Oksana Zhanova, also 17, had come along, though she didn't share Zhenya's passion for risky photography. While Zhenya began climbing the towering structure, Oksana stayed firmly on the ground, watching with a mixture of admiration and concern as her friend ascended higher and higher. She was always looking for the most dramatic shots, Zhenya's grandmother Olga would later tell reporters, her voice breaking with grief. She thought the bridge would make the perfect backdrop. This wasn't Zhenya's first dangerous climb. Like many thrill-seekers her age, she was part of a growing trend where young people scaled tall structures, rooftops, cranes, bridges, to capture breathtaking photos. The danger didn't scare her, it only made the experience more exciting, the resulting images more impressive. When Zhenya reached the top of the bridge, she carefully positioned herself, trying to capture the perfect angle. The city lights twinkled in the distance as she balanced precariously on the metal structure. But as she moved to take the selfie, something went terribly wrong. Whether it was a sudden gust of wind, a misstep, or simply the perilous position she was in, Zhenya lost her balance. In that heart-stopping moment, she realized she was falling. Instinctively, she reached out to grab something, anything, to stop her descent. Her hand caught a cable, but what should have been her salvation became her doom. The cable was live, carrying 1,500 volts of electricity through its metal core. The shock was immediate and devastating. The electricity surged through Zhenya's body, causing her muscles to seize and her grip to loosen. She fell 30 feet to the concrete below, the impact fatal. but the electric shock may have already caused severe damage before she even hit the ground. Oksana, still at the bottom of the bridge, witnessed the entire horrific incident. She watched helplessly as her friend fell, then ran to Zenia's side, but it was too late. When emergency services arrived, alerted by a call about kids on the bridge, they found Oksana frozen in grief beside her friend's body. The police investigation revealed the tragic sequence of events. Zenia had died pursuing what psychologist Martin Voigt would later describe as the perfect shot, a phenomenon increasingly common in the age of social media, where young people take greater and greater risks to capture attention-grabbing images. She died doing what she loved, her grandmother said, finding little comfort in the thought. But she was so young, she had her whole life ahead of her. Zenia's death made headlines across Russia and beyond, becoming a cautionary tale about the dangers of extreme photography. Her story serves as a grim reminder of how quickly a moment of adventure can turn deadly, how the pursuit of the perfect selfie can lead to the ultimate sacrifice. In the end, Zenia Ignatieva's passion for photography, once a source of joy and creativity, led to her tragic and untimely death, another victim of the deadly selfie game. It was July 4th, 2022, when Marco Johnson's quest for the perfect fireworks finale turned into his final act. The 33-year-old mechanic from Denver had always been the type who believed bigger was better, a philosophy that served him well, fixing engines, but would prove catastrophic with explosives. Marco stood 6 feet tall with calloused hands that spoke of years working under car hoods. His boisterous personality made him the life of every party, though his stubborn streak often worried his wife, Sarah. That Independence Day evening, with beer flowing freely at their suburban backyard gathering, Marco's showman instincts kicked into overdrive. Earlier that week, he'd acquired 20 illegal M80 firecrackers from a shady dealer, convinced these would create the spectacular finale his annual 4th of July party deserved. Despite Sarah's concerned protests and his guests' nervous laughter, Marco spent the afternoon in his garage, methodically removing individual fuses and binding the explosives together with electrical tape. His plan seemed foolproof. One long fuse would ignite all 20 simultaneously, creating what he boasted would be heard 3 blocks away. The alcohol had amplified his confidence while dulling his judgment. When Sarah begged him to reconsider, Marco waved her off with his characteristic bravado, insisting his mechanical expertise translated to understanding explosives. At 9:30 p.m., with neighbors gathered expectantly around his backyard, Marco proudly displayed his creation. The bundle resembled a small stick of dynamite, which unknowingly it essentially was. He lit the fuse expecting 10 seconds to retreat to safety, but his modifications had created an unpredictable burn rate. Instead of 10 seconds, Marco had 3. Panic flashed across his face as the fuse disappeared faster than anticipated. He attempted to hurl the bundle away, but the combined force of 20 M80s detonated while still clutched in his right hand. The explosion, equivalent to a quarter stick of dynamite, instantly vaporized his hand and forearm. The devastating blast sent bone fragments tearing through his chest cavity, puncturing both lungs and his heart. Shrapnel peppered his torso while the concussion ruptured his eardrums and caused severe brain trauma. Marco collapsed onto his lawn, blood pooling beneath him, as horrified guests screamed for help. Within 4 minutes, the mechanic who'd spent his career fixing things had succumbed to traumatic injuries and massive blood loss. Paramedics arriving on scene discovered his severed hand 30 feet from where he'd fallen, a grim testament to the explosion's power. The blast echoed for miles, prompting ATF investigations and stricter county fireworks enforcement. Marco's family later sued the illegal dealer, though no legal victory could restore their loss. His 3 young children would grow up without their father's weekend garage lessons. His death served as a stark reminder that some things simply cannot be improved through modification, and that expertise in one field doesn't guarantee competence in another. Marco Johnson's final 4th of July became a cautionary tale about the deadly consequences of combining alcohol, arrogance, and explosives in pursuit of momentary glory. The suburban mechanic who'd always believed he could fix anything had finally encountered something beyond repair, the irreversible damage caused by his own reckless ambition and desire to impress others. It was May 15, 2011, in Brisbane, Australia, and 20-year-old Acton Beale was returning home after a night out with friends. The internet craze of planking was sweeping social networking sites, and Acton, like many young people, had embraced the trend. Planking involved lying face down in unusual or risky places while someone took a photo to share online. The more dangerous the location, the more attention the photo would receive. That night, as Acton arrived at his apartment building, he decided to attempt a daring plank on the balcony railing of his 7th-floor unit. The railing was only 2 inches wide, making it an extremely precarious perch. His friend watched as Acton positioned himself for the stunt. As he attempted to lie down on the narrow railing, Acton suddenly lost his balance. In a horrifying moment, he plummeted 7 stories to the ground below. The fall was devastating and immediate. Emergency services rushed to the scene, and paramedics worked desperately to revive him for 20 minutes, but their efforts were in vain. Acton was pronounced dead at the scene. Deputy Police Commissioner Ross Barnett later confirmed that Acton had been drinking before the accident, which likely impaired his judgment and balance. In some circumstances, planking can be fairly harmless, Barnett explained to reporters. But once you start taking it up 7 stories, or on top of a set of traffic lights, or on a set of railway lines, or on a bridge, it's putting a person in significant danger. The news of Acton's death spread quickly, shocking both the local community and the online world. Australian Prime Minister Julia Gillard even addressed the tragedy, urging people to consider safety first. Everybody likes a bit of fun, but focus has to be on keeping yourself safe first. On social media, reactions were mixed. Some expressed genuine sorrow for the loss of a young life, while others continued to post their own planking photos, seemingly undeterred by the risks. The Planking Australia Facebook page, which had about 55,000 followers before the incident, saw its membership surge to over 87,000 in the days following Acton's death. One Facebook user wrote in response to the tragedy, "One life has been lost because of this. Think of what could happen if it went wrong." But others seemed to view Acton's death as a challenge rather than a warning, with some users encouraging even more extreme planking stunts. The incident came just days after Queensland Police had charged a man for planking on a police car in Gladstone. At that time, they had issued their first warning about the dangers of the trend, particularly when performed in risky locations. Now their worst fears had been realized. Sam Weckert, the founder of the Planking Facebook group, issued a statement following Acton's death. "Planking was started as a fun and quirky pastime, and while we have no control over the actions of others, we'd like to encourage any members of the planking group and the general public to undertake this in a safe and responsible fashion." For Acton's family and friends, the tragedy was devastating. What had begun as a night out ended in an unimaginable loss. His death highlighted the dangerous influence of social media trends that encourage increasingly risky behavior for the sake of likes and attention. In the weeks that followed, authorities across Australia increased their warnings about dangerous planking, but the trend continued to spread globally. Acton Beale became known as the first victim of a social media craze that valued viral fame over personal safety. The legacy of Acton's death serves as a sobering reminder of how quickly a moment of thrill-seeking can turn fatal. As one police officer put it, "Ultimately, is it worth life in a wheelchair to take a funny photo to impress somebody you don't know on the internet?" It was September 24, 1980, and Led Zeppelin's powerhouse drummer John Bonham was preparing for the band's upcoming North American tour. At 32 years old, Bonzo was already a legend, known for his thunderous drumming that gave Led Zeppelin its distinctive sound. But on this day, his notorious appetite for alcohol would lead to one of rock music's most tragic and preventable deaths. The morning started with Bonham being picked up by Led Zeppelin's assistant Rex King. During a breakfast stop, Bonham knocked back 4 quadruple vodka screwdrivers. That's 16 shots of vodka before most people have even started their day. For context, health experts recommend no more than 1 shot per hour with water in between, but Bonham wasn't known for moderation. The band was rehearsing at guitarist Jimmy Page's house in Windsor, England. As the day progressed, Bonham continued drinking heavily, consuming vodka straight from the bottle. By the time rehearsals ended that evening, he had reportedly consumed around 40 shots, nearly 1.5 liters of 40% ABV vodka in just 12 hours. Bonham's drinking was no secret. Despite his image as a wild man of rock, those close to him knew he struggled with alcohol dependency. He had recently kicked a heroin habit but had replaced it with even heavier drinking. The pressure of touring had always been difficult for him. He hated flying, suffered from panic attacks before shows, and missed his family terribly when on the road. That morning, while riding to rehearsal with Robert Plant, Bonham had confided, "I've had it with playing drums. Everybody plays better than me." It was a surprising admission from a man widely regarded as one of the greatest drummers in rock history. By the end of rehearsals, Bonham was severely intoxicated. He passed out on a sofa and was carried to a bedroom by an assistant who carefully laid him on his side and propped him up with pillows, a precaution that tragically proved insufficient. The next morning, Led Zeppelin's road manager Benji Lefebvre and bassist John Paul Jones went to check on Bonham. They found him unresponsive and immediately knew something was terribly wrong. Despite their efforts to revive him, Bonham was gone. The autopsy revealed the cause of death: pulmonary aspiration. In simple terms, Bonham had vomited in his sleep and choked on it. His body had begun rejecting the massive amount of alcohol, but in his unconscious state, he couldn't turn over or clear his airway. It was a slow, silent death that might have been prevented had someone stayed with him throughout the night. What makes Bonham's death particularly senseless is how avoidable it was. His bandmates were well aware of his drinking problem. Earlier that year, during a European tour, he had shown signs of fatigue and had been taken ill during a show in Nuremberg. The warning signs were there, but the rock and roll lifestyle normalized such excessive behavior. In the aftermath, Led Zeppelin made the decision not to continue without their drummer. On December 4, 1980, they announced their disbandment, stating that they couldn't go on without Bonham. His death effectively ended one of rock's greatest bands at the height of their powers. John Bonham's legacy as a drummer remains unparalleled. His thunderous beats on tracks like When the Levee Breaks and Kashmir continue to influence drummers today. But his death serves as a stark reminder of alcohol's dangers and the rock culture that often glorifies excess. In the end, the man who once told Robert Plant he was the greatest drummer in the world died not from some dramatic rock and roll incident, but from the simple, stupid act of drinking far too much and being left alone to sleep it off. A dumb, tragic end for a legendary musician. Thanks for watching. These stories show that even everyday moments can spiral into the unthinkable. Click here for more unbelievable tales where one bad decision led to a fatal twist. It was July 4th, 2022, when Preston Doyle's quest for viral fame turned into a deadly spectacle in Mobile, Alabama. The 21-year-old college dropout had built a reputation around his backyard stunts and minor viral clips. The previous 4th of July, he'd taped 20 sparklers to his jacket and sprinted around a cul-de-sac, earning neighborhood applause and social media likes. Those fleeting moments of attention planted a dangerous seed in his mind. Preston spent months planning what he called the Human Sparkler 2.0. He constructed a full-body jumpsuit by duct taping over 100 firecrackers and small aerial shells to a cotton hoodie and jeans. No flame-retardant materials were considered. No safety protocols existed. Just raw ambition and a friend armed with a blowtorch to light the ignition fuse. Friends warned him about the risks, but Preston dismissed their concerns. He was convinced this stunt would finally give him the breakthrough he desperately craved. The plan seemed foolproof in his mind. Run down the street as fireworks launched from his body in a spectacular display that would break the internet. At 9:03 p.m., 15 cheering onlookers gathered as Preston prepared for his grand finale. The summer air was thick with anticipation and the smell of barbecue smoke from nearby celebrations. Preston struck a pose, grinning confidently as his friend approached with the blowtorch. The ignition fuse sparked to life. The first few firecrackers popped in sequence as intended, drawing cheers from the crowd. But the aerial shells on his back had other plans. They ignited prematurely and simultaneously, creating a backdraft that instantly engulfed the upper half of his suit in flames. The cotton fabric caught fire immediately, melting and adhering to his skin within seconds. Preston's confident grin vanished as he stumbled and collapsed, his screams piercing the night air. Chaos erupted as other fireworks began launching erratically in all directions, striking parked cars, igniting shrubbery, and sending the crowd scrambling for cover. Friends who tried to help were forced to retreat as firecrackers ricocheted off the pavement, exploding around them in a deadly light show. For nearly 90 seconds, no one could reach Preston through the ongoing barrage of sparks, smoke, and popping blasts. The very spectacle he'd created to entertain had become his prison. By the time someone managed to get close with a garden hose, Preston was no longer moving, his body severely burned beyond recognition. He was airlifted to a burn trauma center, but the damage was too extensive. Preston succumbed to his injuries 48 hours later, his dreams of viral fame extinguished, along with his life. The tragedy serves as a stark reminder that the pursuit of online attention can lead down increasingly dangerous paths. What started as harmless sparklers escalated into a lethal fireworks suit, proving that sometimes the price of going viral is far too high to pay. It was August 12, 2015, when Tyler Brooks decided to turn his annual Phoenix pool party into a deadly spectacle that would haunt everyone present. The 26-year-old insurance salesman had been building his reputation as the neighborhood daredevil, each summer pushing the boundaries further to earn gasps and cheers from his guests. What started as simple diving tricks had evolved into increasingly reckless stunts that made even his closest friends uncomfortable. By noon that scorching Arizona day, Tyler was already several drinks deep, his judgment clouded by alcohol and an insatiable need for attention. The two-story house provided the perfect launching pad for what he called his ultimate cannonball, a stunt he'd been planning all summer. His girlfriend watched nervously as Tyler made his third trip to the roof's edge, each attempt drawing more concerned voices from below. Friends had already begun leaving, their fun overshadowed by growing anxiety about Tyler's deteriorating condition and dangerous fixation. The warnings fell on deaf ears. Tyler's alcohol-soaked brain could only process the imagined glory of his signature move. He grabbed a colorful beach ball, convinced it would add flair to his performance, and climbed onto the roof one final time. Standing 24 feet above the concrete deck, Tyler positioned himself with the confidence of someone whose perception had been completely distorted. The shallow end of the pool stretched below, but his intoxicated mind miscalculated both distance and trajectory. With a triumphant yell, Tyler launched himself into the air, attempting multiple flips while clutching the beach ball. The physics were unforgiving. His excessive force and poor positioning sent him sailing past the pool's edge, reality crashing down as he realized mid-flight that water wouldn't break his fall. The concrete pool deck met Tyler's skull with devastating finality. The sickening crack echoed across the suddenly silent party as his head split open on impact. His neck snapped at the second cervical vertebra, severing his spinal cord instantly. The beach ball bounced mockingly into the pool while Tyler's broken body lay motionless, blood spreading across the sun-baked concrete. The massive head trauma caused immediate brain death, while the spinal severance ensured respiratory failure within seconds. Party guests stood frozen in horror, the festive atmosphere replaced by screams and chaos. Several people would require extensive counseling to process what they'd witnessed, a friend's life ending in an instant due to alcohol-fueled recklessness. Emergency responders arrived to find a scene that would stick with them throughout their careers. Tyler's death was instantaneous, the combination of traumatic brain injury and spinal cord damage leaving no possibility of survival. The aftermath rippled through the Phoenix community and beyond. Insurance companies began implementing stricter policies regarding pool parties and alcohol consumption at private residences. Tyler's death became a cautionary tale used in safety presentations across Arizona. His girlfriend, who had threatened to leave if he attempted the stunt, was left to grapple with survivor's guilt and the knowledge that her final words to Tyler had been spoken in anger. The friends who stayed to witness the tragedy struggled with questions about whether they could have done more to prevent it. The pool that had been the centerpiece of so many happy gatherings became a constant reminder of how quickly celebration can turn to catastrophe. Tyler's parents eventually sold the house, unable to bear the sight of where their son's need for attention had cost him everything. What began as another summer party in suburban Phoenix ended with a young man's life cut short by a toxic combination of alcohol, ego, and poor judgment. Tyler Brooks had finally achieved the attention he craved, but at the ultimate price, becoming a permanent reminder that some stunts aren't worth the applause. It was October 14, 2016, when Sarah Adams turned her Naperville, Illinois kitchen into a death trap with her so-called revolutionary dishwashing technique. At 31, this marketing manager was determined to prove she didn't need anyone after her messy divorce 6 months earlier. She'd invited 6 colleagues over for her first dinner party as a single woman, spending weeks bragging about her culinary genius and how she'd reinvented basic kitchen tasks. Sarah had developed an obsession with efficiency that bordered on dangerous. She believed dishwashers were too slow and inefficient, so she'd created what she called her speed washing system. Her modification involved completely removing the dishwasher door and replacing it with a homemade bungee cord contraption that she'd designed herself using YouTube tutorials and pure arrogance. The centerpiece of her insane invention was a custom-built knife carousel, a spinning mechanism she'd constructed inside the dishwasher that held all her kitchen knives with blades pointing in every direction. According to Sarah's twisted logic, this would provide maximum cleaning coverage, as the knives spun freely during the wash cycle. At 7:45 p.m., with her guests already gathered around the dining table, Sarah informed them that dinner would be delayed. She insisted on showcasing what she called her speed wash technique, a cleaning method she believed would eventually make her a fortune, once she got around to filing the patent paperwork. Her horrified colleagues watched as Sarah explained her method. Start the dishwasher cycle, then manually spin the knife carousel, while reaching inside to guide the cleaning process by hand. She claimed that machines lacked intelligence and needed human oversight to function properly. Despite her guests practically begging her to stop, Sarah was determined to prove her system's superiority. She started the cycle and immediately plunged both hands into the spinning, water-filled dishwasher. The scalding water mixed with high-pressure jets created a chaotic environment, but Sarah pressed on. The knife carousel began spinning at dangerous speeds, flinging sharp blades in every direction like a medieval torture device. Any rational person would have backed away, but Sarah leaned her entire upper body into the dishwasher to demonstrate what she called proper form. Multiple knives struck her simultaneously as the spinning mechanism went completely out of control. A paring knife sliced across her forearm, a steak knife grazed her shoulder, but the fatal blow came from her prized 10-inch chef's knife. The blade flew directly into her chest with tremendous force, piercing both her heart and lungs. Sarah collapsed forward into the dishwasher, her body becoming tangled in the bungee cord system she'd created. The continuing wash cycle and spinning knives caused additional devastating injuries as her life drained away in the soapy, blood-tinged water. Her guests, stunned into silence by the horrific scene, finally snapped into action and called 911. Paramedics arrived within 7 minutes but found Sarah's body grotesquely twisted in her own contraption. The dishwasher was still running, continuing to spray water and spin knives around her lifeless form. It took emergency responders nearly 20 minutes to safely shut down her deadly invention and extract her body from the mechanical nightmare she'd created. It was May 18, 2015, when Amanda Rodriguez thought she had found the perfect solution to navigating her tech company's massive 50-acre campus in Austin, Texas. The 31-year-old CEO had just dropped $6,000 on a top-of-the-line Segway PTI-2, convinced it would revolutionize her daily routine and showcase her commitment to innovation. Amanda was notorious for being an early adopter of every new gadget that hit the market. To her, the Segway wasn't just transportation, it was a statement piece that screamed efficiency and forward-thinking leadership. However, her enthusiasm far exceeded her preparation. While the user manual clearly recommended 2 to 3 hours of practice time, Amanda had squeezed in barely 20 minutes the night before, dismissing it as unnecessary for someone of her intelligence. Her assistant had specifically warned her about the steep concrete staircase that led down to the campus fountain courtyard, but Amanda waved off the concern with typical confidence. She had an important investor meeting to attend, and nothing was going to slow her down, especially not some overly cautious safety advice. At exactly 2:15 that afternoon, Amanda was cruising across the campus at the Segway's maximum speed of 12.5 miles per hour. She was deep in an animated conference call through her Bluetooth headset, gesturing wildly with her hands as she discussed quarterly projections with potential investors. Her attention was completely divided between the high-stakes conversation and her surroundings. As she approached the top of the 15-step concrete staircase, Amanda was so engrossed in her phone call that she failed to notice where she was heading. The Segway, designed for smooth surfaces and gentle inclines, had no capability to handle stairs. Without engaging the steering mechanism to turn away, she rode straight toward the edge of the staircase. The front wheels rolled over the first step, immediately causing the platform to tilt forward at a dangerous 45-degree angle. Amanda was launched forward off the platform, but her right foot became trapped in the steering mechanism, creating a horrifying tether between her body and the 103-pound machine. She tumbled headfirst down the concrete steps, while still partially attached to the runaway Segway. Her skull struck the sharp concrete edge of the seventh step with tremendous force, causing a massive basilar skull fracture that would prove instantly fatal. The Segway continued its destructive descent, eventually landing directly on top of her, crushing her ribcage and rupturing her spleen with its considerable weight. The severe traumatic brain injury and internal bleeding caused Amanda to lose consciousness immediately. Despite the quick response from several employees who witnessed the accident and called 911, paramedics could only pronounce her dead at the scene. She had died within 2 minutes of the initial impact. The tragedy prompted immediate changes across the corporate campus. The company banned all personal transportation devices and installed safety barriers around every stairway. Amanda's death became a cautionary tale about the dangers of overconfidence and distraction, proving that even the most innovative technology can become deadly when combined with human error and poor judgment. It was June 15, 2024, when Bobby Henderson's procrastination finally caught up with him in the most horrific way imaginable. The 52-year-old insurance adjuster from Columbus, Ohio, had been putting off his yard work for 3 solid weeks, choosing golf games and work obligations over basic home maintenance. Bobby's homeowners association wasn't amused by his neglect. 2 warning letters had already arrived, threatening fines for his overgrown grass that violated neighborhood standards. That Saturday morning, his wife delivered an ultimatum that cut through his excuses like a blade. Either he mowed the lawn immediately, or she was hiring a professional service and billing him for the embarrassment. Rushing outside without his usual pre-mowing inspection, Bobby skipped breakfast entirely to get an early start before the summer heat became unbearable. His riding mower hadn't been serviced in 2 years, but he figured it would hold up for 1 more season. The thick morning dew coating the overgrown grass should have been his first warning sign, but Bobby was focused solely on finishing before his 10 o'clock tea time. At exactly 7 in the morning, Bobby fired up the mower and began cutting at maximum speed, determined to complete the job as quickly as possible. The wet, thick grass created clumpy piles that his neglected machine struggled to handle effectively. After 20 minutes of aggressive mowing, disaster struck when the soggy grass clippings became hopelessly tangled around the mower deck and discharge chute. The engine began bogging down under the strain. But instead of following basic safety protocol, Bobby made a fatal decision. He left the engine running and dismounted to clear the jam by hand, completely ignoring the fundamental rule of lawnmower operation: always turn off the engine before performing any maintenance. As Bobby bent down to pull the tangled grass from underneath the 42-inch cutting deck, his foot slipped on the treacherous wet morning dew. He fell directly toward the spinning blades, which were still engaged and rotating at full deadly speed. The razor-sharp cutting blades struck his torso and arms with devastating force, causing massive lacerations and severing major blood vessels throughout his upper body. The simple failure to hit the off switch before clearing the jam cost Bobby everything. He bled out within minutes on his own front lawn, his life ending in the most preventable way possible. His wife discovered his mangled body 30 minutes later when she brought him his morning coffee, immediately calling 911 despite knowing it was far too late. The tragic incident prompted the neighborhood association to distribute comprehensive lawnmower safety pamphlets to every household, hoping to prevent another senseless death. Bobby's story became a grim reminder that basic safety protocols exist for good reason, and that no schedule is worth risking your life over a simple yard maintenance task. It was October 15, 2019, when Tyler Brooks made the decision that would end his 19-year-old life in the basement laundry room of his University of Michigan dormitory. Tyler was the kind of freshman who always seemed to be running on empty, not just his phone battery, but his energy, his patience, and increasingly, his judgment. A computer science major from suburban Detroit, he had that restless intelligence that made him think he could outsmart any system. His friends knew him as the guy who would spend hours finding a 10-minute shortcut, the type who bought the cheapest version of everything and then tried to modify it into something better. That night, Tyler was 3 energy drinks deep into what should have been a simple programming assignment. His phone had died hours earlier, and the cheap $3 replacement charger he had ordered online was taking forever to bring it back to life. Sleep-deprived and jittery from caffeine, Tyler's mind fixated on a half-remembered conversation about voltage and charging speeds. The basement laundry room felt like a tomb at 2:15 a.m. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Tyler stared at the 220-volt dryer outlet, his tired brain convinced this was the solution to his charging problems. He pulled out his pocket knife and began stripping the wires of his knockoff charger, the plastic insulation peeling away to reveal copper underneath. Tyler wrapped the exposed wires around the dryer outlet prongs with the confidence of someone who had never truly understood the difference between being clever and being reckless. The moment he plugged in his phone and the connection was made, 220 volts of electricity surged through the poorly constructed charger. The current hit Tyler's hands first, traveling through his phone and into his body. His muscles contracted involuntarily, his grip tightening around the device that was now killing him. The electricity coursed through his chest, disrupting the delicate electrical system that kept his heart beating in rhythm. Within seconds, his heart entered ventricular fibrillation. Tyler collapsed onto the cold concrete floor, his body convulsing as the sustained electrical shock burned through his hands and sent his heart into cardiac arrest. The basement fell silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights and the electrical current still flowing through the modified charger. 3 minutes later, Tyler Brooks was dead. A sophomore doing late-night laundry discovered his body 20 minutes later, the modified charger still plugged into the dryer outlet like evidence of a fatal experiment. Campus maintenance had to shut down power to the entire building before paramedics could safely approach the scene. The investigation revealed that Tyler had bypassed every safety feature built into modern charging cables. His $3 shortcut had cost him everything. The university responded by installing tamper-proof covers on all high-voltage outlets in common areas and launching a campus-wide electrical safety education program. Tyler's death became a cautionary tale whispered among students during finals week, a reminder that some shortcuts lead nowhere good. His parents established a scholarship in his name for computer science students, hoping that future generations might channel their curiosity more safely than their son had that October night. His roommate later found Tyler's laptop still open to the programming assignment he never finished, the cursor blinking endlessly in an empty code window. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. A computer science student killed by his misunderstanding of basic electrical principles. In the end, Tyler Brooks had been right about one thing. The 220-volt outlet could indeed charge a phone faster. He just never got the chance to see it work. It was December 8, 2020, when 24-year-old Jessica Martinez made a decision that would cost her everything. The ambitious social media manager from Minneapolis had built her career on understanding what made content go viral, but her relentless pursuit of online fame would lead her down a deadly path. Jessica was the type of person who lived and breathed social media trends. Standing 5 feet 4 inches with an infectious smile, she worked for a local marketing firm while building her personal brand. Her bubbly personality and willingness to try anything for content had made her popular, but it also made her reckless. That winter evening, Jessica found herself alone in her suburban Minneapolis home. Her roommate had left to visit family for the holidays, leaving Jessica with her phone, her ambitions, and a dangerous idea. She had been following an 18-hour intermittent fasting trend, and her stomach was growling with increasing intensity. Earlier that day, Jessica had been scrolling through social platforms when she stumbled upon videos of people attempting extreme cold food challenges. The views were astronomical, and Jessica saw an opportunity. She decided to create her own version, something nobody had attempted before. At 7:30 p.m., Jessica opened her freezer and pulled out a 12-pound frozen turkey. The bird was solid as a rock, stored at -10 degrees Fahrenheit. Most people would have recognized the obvious danger, but Jessica's hunger and desperation for viral content clouded her judgment. She set up her phone to record and grabbed a kitchen knife. The plan was simple: chip off pieces of the frozen turkey and eat them raw, creating the ultimate extreme cold challenge. She began hacking away at the frozen bird, creating chunks harder than ice cubes. Jessica forced the first piece into her mouth, immediately feeling the shocking cold against her teeth and tongue. The frozen meat began causing frostbite damage to her oral tissues within seconds. Her mouth started going numb, but she interpreted this as adapting to the challenge. Driven by her empty stomach and adrenaline, Jessica continued shoving larger pieces of frozen turkey into her mouth. Each chunk was roughly golf ball sized, and the extreme cold was systematically destroying nerve endings in her mouth and throat. The numbness became Jessica's enemy when a large piece of frozen turkey, about 4 inches long, became lodged in her throat. She couldn't feel it properly. The frostbite had damaged her ability to sense the obstruction. and she continued trying to swallow more frozen meat. Each additional piece pushed the original obstruction deeper into her airway. The combination of swelling from frostbite damage and physical blockage created a perfect storm. Jessica's breathing became increasingly labored, but numbness prevented her from understanding the severity. Within minutes, the frozen turkey had completely blocked her trachea. Jessica began choking violently, her body's reflexes kicking in too late. She clawed at her throat, trying desperately to dislodge the obstruction, but numbness made it impossible to locate or remove the frozen meat. Jessica collapsed on her kitchen floor, her phone still recording. The lack of oxygen quickly took its toll, and within 6 minutes of the initial obstruction, she lost consciousness and died from asphyxiation. Her roommate discovered the tragic scene when she returned home unexpectedly. The 911 call came too late. Paramedics arrived to find Jessica's lifeless body surrounded by chunks of frozen turkey and her still recording phone. The medical examiner's report revealed the full tragedy. A 4-inch piece of frozen turkey was found completely blocking her trachea, while extensive frostbite damage was documented throughout her mouth and throat. The combination of extreme cold exposure and mechanical obstruction had created an unsurvivable situation. Jessica's death sent shockwaves through the social media community and sparked widespread discussions about the dangerous lengths people will go to for viral content. Her final video, never posted, served as a grim reminder that the pursuit of online fame can have deadly consequences. It was March 3, 2020, when Derek Williams's explosive temper finally met its match at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas campus. Derek had always been a powder keg waiting to explode. Growing up with a father who constantly berated him for being weak and drilled into him that real men never back down, Derek developed an uncontrollable rage that followed him everywhere. His fraternity brothers knew to give him space when things didn't go his way, and campus dining staff had learned this lesson the hard way. Derek was banned from 3 dining halls for his aggressive outbursts over the smallest inconveniences. That fateful night, Derek was down to his last $5, desperately needing food before a crucial exam. The vending machine outside the library seemed like his salvation, but it quickly became his nemesis. The machine swallowed his money on the first attempt, leaving him empty-handed and furious. His roommate offered to lend him cash, but Derek's pride wouldn't allow him to accept help. Real men solve their own problems. When the machine ate his money a second time, Derek's fist connected with the glass, creating spiderweb cracks across the surface. By the third theft, something inside Derek snapped completely. The 900-pound vending machine became the target of 12 minutes of pure, unhinged fury. Derek began violently shaking the massive machine, his muscles straining against its weight. When that failed to dislodge his snacks, he started ramming his shoulder into it repeatedly, each impact causing the machine to rock dangerously on its base. The rational part of his mind had completely shut down. There was only rage and the need to win this battle. Spotting a nearby bench, Derek climbed up to gain better leverage. From this elevated position, he grabbed the top of the machine and began pulling it toward himself with all his strength. The machine tilted at a precarious 30-degree angle, teetering on the edge of disaster. But Derek couldn't see past his anger to recognize the mortal danger he had created. Physics took over where Derek's judgment had failed. The massive machine reached its tipping point and began crashing forward. Derek tried to jump clear, but his foot caught on the bench, sending him tumbling backward just as 900 pounds of metal and machinery came crushing down. The impact was devastating. The machine's full weight landed squarely on Derek's chest, instantly shattering his ribcage. Multiple ribs punctured both lungs, causing immediate collapse and internal bleeding. His sternum exploded into fragments that tore into his heart. Within 4 minutes, Derek Williams was dead, crushed by his own uncontrollable rage and a vending machine that simply wouldn't give him his snacks. Security cameras captured every moment of Derek's final tantrum. When emergency responders arrived 8 minutes after a horrified student called 911, they found Derek's lifeless body pinned beneath the machine that had finally won their battle. The $5 that started it all lay scattered on the floor, worthless now that Derek would never need food again. In the end, Derek's father's lessons about never backing down had led his son to a fight he couldn't win against an opponent that felt no pain, showed no mercy, and weighed 900 pounds. It was January 14, 2013 in Cantonment, Florida. James Campbell, a 68-year-old Vietnam veteran, had lived in the area for most of his life. He was well known and well liked, a loyal friend and family man with a simple life. But on this particular day, a series of mundane events would lead to one of the most bizarre deaths ever recorded in Florida's history. James and his wife, 56-year-old Iris Fortner, were returning home in their 1995 Chevrolet van. It was a routine they'd done countless times before: pull up to their driveway, open the metal gates, and park the van. The couple also had a large boxer bulldog, a beloved pet that would unknowingly become an instrument of death. As they approached their home, James stepped out of the passenger side to open the metal gates, allowing the vehicle to enter. Iris remained in the driver's seat, ready to back the van into the driveway once the gates were open. As James walked towards the gates, Iris opened her door to check on his position. That's when everything went horribly wrong. Their dog, curious and excited, saw its opportunity. The large boxer jumped into the front seat, and in a freak accident that nobody could have predicted, landed right on the accelerator pedal. The van, which was in reverse gear, suddenly surged backward. Iris, caught completely off guard, desperately tried to stop the vehicle. She reached for the brake, but it was too late. The van backed into James, trapping him under its wheels. Emergency services were called immediately. Escambia County paramedics arrived quickly, but there was nothing they could do. James Campbell was pronounced dead at the scene. The impact had been severe, and despite Iris's frantic efforts, the accident was unavoidable. The Florida Highway Patrol conducted an investigation into the incident. The sequence of events seemed almost too bizarre to be true. A man killed by his own dog accidentally pressing the accelerator. Yet the evidence was clear. James had exited the van to open the gates. Iris had opened the door to check on his position, and their dog had jumped into the driver's seat, inadvertently pressing the accelerator. Local news outlets covered the story extensively. Neighbors and friends expressed their condolences, sharing their grief and disbelief. Many described James, affectionately known as Bo, as a good friend and a devoted family man. He was a graduate of Tate High School and a veteran who had served his country in Vietnam, only to meet his end in such an unbelievable way. Despite the overwhelming support, there were whispers of suspicion. Some questioned the probability of such an accident, suggesting there might be more to the story. However, the official reports and eyewitness accounts left little room for doubt. It was simply a tragic accident, a series of unfortunate events that led to the loss of a beloved community member. The dog, who had unintentionally caused the accident, remained with Iris. The boxer bulldog wasn't blamed for its actions. It had acted out of excitement and curiosity, with no way of understanding the consequences of its actions. Iris suffered minor injuries but was not charged with any wrongdoing. She was left to cope with the loss of her husband in what must be one of the most bizarre accidents in Florida's history. Today, James Campbell's death serves as a reminder of how unpredictable life can be. In a matter of seconds, a routine activity, a beloved pet, and a simple check on someone's position combine to create a perfect storm of tragedy. It's the kind of death that makes you realize sometimes the most dangerous moments aren't the ones we prepare for. They're the ordinary ones we never see coming. It was August 17, 2019, when Dustin Crawford's obsession with becoming a competitive eating champion led him to the most ridiculous death in Cedar Rapids County Fair history. The 27-year-old insurance claims adjuster had spent months perfecting what he believed was his ticket to fame, the Chubby Bunny Challenge. After being rejected from 3 legitimate eating contests for lack of experience, Dustin refused to abandon his dream. He discovered the county fair was hosting an unofficial marshmallow eating contest with a modest $50 prize, and saw it as his golden opportunity. For weeks, Dustin had trained religiously in his apartment, timing himself while stuffing increasingly large quantities of marshmallows into his mouth. His girlfriend had left him the previous week, calling his marshmallow obsession pathetic and embarrassing, but Dustin remained undeterred, convinced that victory at the fair would prove everyone wrong. The contest rules were simple. Participants had to stuff large marshmallows in their mouths, while clearly saying Chubby Bunny after each edition. The last person standing would claim the prize. What started as innocent county fair entertainment quickly turned into a nightmare scenario that would haunt Cedar Rapids for years. From the opening round, Dustin ignored the speech requirement entirely, cramming marshmallows into his mouth at a reckless pace that far exceeded his competitors. While others struggled to pronounce the required phrase around 3 or 4 marshmallows, Dustin was already approaching double digits. By the 8th round, he had managed to pack 23 marshmallows into his mouth and throat, creating a dangerous situation that contest officials failed to recognize. The marshmallows began absorbing his saliva and expanding, forming an increasingly dense and sticky mass that gradually blocked his airway. Despite being unable to speak or breathe properly, Dustin attempted to continue adding marshmallows to his already overloaded mouth. The sugary mass transformed into a cement-like consistency that completely sealed both his throat and nasal passages. His face began turning blue as oxygen deprivation set in. Panic struck as Dustin frantically clawed at his mouth, desperately trying to remove the compacted marshmallows. Contest officials attempted the Heimlich maneuver, but the sticky marshmallow plug had become too dense and adhesive to dislodge through conventional means. Death occurred within minutes from complete airway obstruction. When paramedics arrived, they found the final marshmallow still clutched tightly in Dustin's hand, a tragic symbol of his misguided determination to achieve competitive eating glory at any cost. The aftermath proved equally absurd. Dustin's mother filed a lawsuit against the marshmallow manufacturer, claiming their product was too sticky for safe human consumption. The fair's insurance company refused to pay any settlement, stating that death by marshmallow wasn't covered under their standard policy terms. The Cedar Rapids County Fair discontinued all eating contests following the incident, and Dustin Crawford became an unfortunate cautionary tale about the dangers of pursuing fame through reckless food challenges. It was September 28, 1567, in the picturesque town of Braunau am Inn, Austria. Hans Steininger was no ordinary man. He was the town's burgomaster, what we'd call a mayor today, and he had been elected to this position 6 times in a row. But what made Hans truly remarkable wasn't his political career, it was his beard. This wasn't just any beard. It was an extraordinary 4.5-foot-long masterpiece that had become his trademark. On a typical day, Hans would carefully roll up his massive beard and tuck it safely into his pocket before going about his business. He was well loved by the townspeople, known for his leadership and, of course, that magnificent facial hair that trailed behind him when unleashed. But on this particular evening, a series of events would unfold that would turn his pride and joy into an instrument of death. The trouble began when a fire broke out in the town. As the burgomaster, Hans felt duty-bound to help coordinate the emergency response. In his haste to assist his fellow townspeople, he made a fatal mistake. He forgot to roll up and secure his beard. As panic spread through the streets and smoke filled the air, Hans rushed to help, but fate had other plans. As he hurried down a flight of stairs, something went terribly wrong. His own foot landed on his trailing beard, and in an instant the pride of Braunau am Inn became his downfall. Literally, Hans tumbled down the stairs and in the process his neck snapped. The man who had led the town through 6 terms as burgomaster was killed by his own facial hair. The town was shocked by the bizarre nature of their beloved leader's death. But Hans Steininger's story didn't end there. Before his burial, his famous beard was carefully cut off and preserved. It became a treasured artifact, passed down through generations of his family like some sort of peculiar heirloom. Can you imagine growing up and having your father hand you a 4-foot-long disembodied beard saying, "Son, this is yours now. Take good care of it"? Eventually, in 1919, someone in the family finally decided enough was enough and donated the beard to the town. Today, more than 450 years after Hans Steininger's death, you can still see his legendary beard on display at the District Museum Herzogsburg in Braunau. The town also honors his memory with a large stone relief carving on the side of St. Stephen's Church, showing Hans with his infamous beard flowing down past his feet. The story of Hans Steininger serves as a bizarre reminder of how the very thing that makes us famous can sometimes be our undoing. His death might seem almost comical today, but it's also a testament to how even the most mundane things, like forgetting to tuck away your beard, can have fatal consequences. In Braunau am Inn, they've chosen to celebrate this unusual piece of their history, even offering tours led by Steininger reenactors wearing flowing fake beards, though presumably they're careful on the stairs. Today, visitors to Braunau can still see both the stone relief of Hans and his preserved beard, reminders of the man who quite literally died for his facial hair. It's probably the only case in history where a beard turned from fashion statement to murder weapon, making Hans Steininger's death one of the most bizarre endings in human history. It was March 3, 2015, when Jennifer Walsh made the kind of decision that seems harmless until it isn't. The 34-year-old freelance graphic designer had been grinding through another brutal all-nighter in her cramped Portland studio apartment, fueled by nothing but energy drinks, and desperation. Her business was hanging by a thread, and this client's deadline was make or break territory. For 3 weeks straight, Jennifer had been living like a zombie, 16-hour workdays blending into sleepless nights, surviving on instant meals and whatever she could nuke in her ancient microwave. The thing had been sparking and making weird noises for months, but repairs weren't exactly in the budget when you're choosing between fixing appliances and keeping the lights on. At 3:15 a.m., hunger finally won over exhaustion. Jennifer stumbled to her kitchen, determined to maximize efficiency even in her food prep. Her sleep-deprived brain had latched onto some half-remembered internet hack about cooking multiple items simultaneously to save time and electricity. She'd been arguing with her roommate about utility bills, and this seemed like the perfect way to prove microwaves weren't the energy hogs everyone claimed. What happened next was a masterclass in how not to use kitchen appliances. Jennifer loaded up her microwave like she was playing Tetris, a sealed mason jar packed with leftover soup, a hard-boiled egg still in its shell, and a closed container of Chinese takeout. But she wasn't done. Remembering something about water distributing heat evenly, she filled a coffee mug to the brim and placed it dead center of this culinary disaster waiting to happen. 8 minutes on high power. That was her plan. Cook everything at once, save time, prove a point. The microwave groaned to life, immediately protesting with loud popping sounds that would have sent any rational person running. But Jennifer wasn't rational anymore. She was running on fumes and bad decisions. Instead of backing away, she pressed her face against the door window, trying to see what was happening inside. The sealed containers began expanding like balloons at a birthday party, the egg developing ominous cracks along its surface. Jennifer watched, mesmerized by her own impending doom, as pressure built to catastrophic levels inside multiple improvised bombs. At exactly 3:17 a.m., physics took over. The mason jar exploded first, followed instantly by the hard-boiled egg, creating a chain reaction that turned Jennifer's microwave into a fragmentation grenade. The door shattered outward, sending glass shards directly into her face and neck as she peered through the window like a curious child at a fireworks show. One large fragment found its mark with surgical precision, severing her carotid artery while smaller pieces shredded her eyes and airways. Jennifer collapsed onto her kitchen floor, surrounded by a grotesque mixture of food debris, broken glass, and rapidly spreading blood. Within minutes, her makeshift efficiency experiment had efficiently ended her life. Her roommate found her 6 minutes later, awakened by what sounded like a small explosion. Paramedics arrived quickly, but Jennifer had already bled out on the linoleum floor of her studio apartment, a victim of her own exhausted logic and a fundamental misunderstanding of how pressure works. The fire department report described the cause clearly and concisely. Multiple sealed containers had been microwaved at once, effectively turning them into pressure bombs. According to her roommate, the victim had a habit of cutting corners, often choosing speed and low cost over safety, and rarely took the time to read instructions. Jennifer Walsh died because she treated her microwave like a magic box instead of the radiation-powered heating device it actually was, proving that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is our own impatience. It was November 8, 2021, when Rebecca Martinez's competitive spirit would lead to a devastating end in her Nashville kitchen. The 35-year-old elementary school teacher had always been the adventurous one among her college sorority sisters, constantly pushing culinary boundaries to impress her longtime friends during their monthly virtual gatherings. Rebecca possessed an infectious enthusiasm that made her beloved by both students and colleagues. Her bubbly personality and determination to excel at everything she attempted had earned her the nickname Super Teacher at Lincoln Elementary. However, this same drive for perfection would prove fatal on that autumn evening. The afternoon had started innocently enough. Rebecca had been sipping wine while preparing for the virtual cooking competition with her sorority sisters, a tradition they had maintained since college. The alcohol had loosened her inhibitions, making her more daring than usual. She decided to attempt bananas Foster, a dish she had never prepared before, determined to create something spectacular for her friends watching via Zoom. Her small Nashville apartment kitchen was poorly ventilated, with only a tiny window above the sink. Multiple burners had been running for hours, creating a sweltering environment. The cheap electric stove she relied on made flame control unpredictable. At exactly 7:20 p.m., Rebecca heated her largest skillet with butter and brown sugar, while her friends cheered her on through their computer screens, emboldened by their encouragement and the wine. She poured half a cup of rum into the pan, far exceeding the recipe's requirement. She wanted to create a spectacular flame that would leave her friends amazed. The moment Rebecca tilted the pan toward the electric burner's glowing coil, disaster struck. A massive fireball erupted from the skillet, far larger than anything she had anticipated. The alcohol vapor had been accumulating in the poorly ventilated space, creating perfect conditions for a flash fire that spread with terrifying speed. Flames immediately engulfed Rebecca's loose cotton blouse, the fabric igniting like kindling. The fire quickly spread to her long brown hair and face as she stood frozen in shock. Panic overtook her rational thinking, and she instinctively ran toward the sink, but her frantic movement only fanned the flames, making them burn with increased intensity. The synthetic blend of her shirt began melting onto her skin, creating third-degree burns across 60% of her upper body. The superheated gases she inhaled seared her throat and lungs, causing immediate respiratory distress. Rebecca collapsed in her narrow hallway, her airways severely damaged and filling with fluid. Her sorority sisters, still connected through the video call, watched in horror as their friend disappeared from view. They immediately contacted Nashville Emergency Services, providing the dispatcher with Rebecca's address while desperately calling her name through their screens. Firefighters arrived within 4 minutes of the emergency call, but they found Rebecca unconscious with devastating burns and severe smoke inhalation. The paramedics worked frantically to stabilize her condition before rushing her to Vanderbilt University Medical Center. Despite the medical team's best efforts, Rebecca's injuries proved too severe. The respiratory failure caused by her burned airways and fluid-filled lungs could not be reversed. She was pronounced dead 3 hours after the accident, leaving behind a devastated family, friends, and students who had adored their energetic teacher. The fire department's investigation revealed dangerous levels of alcohol vapor throughout Rebecca's kitchen, confirming that the accumulated fumes had created conditions for the flash fire. The combination of poor ventilation, excessive alcohol, and inexperience had proven lethal. Rebecca's tragic death prompted her school district to implement safety protocols for virtual cooking activities. Her story serves as a sobering reminder that kitchen safety should never be compromised. It was September 16, 2016, when Michael Davis made the fatal mistake that would end his life at just 31 years old. The insurance adjuster from rural Montana had recently purchased his first handgun, a Glock 19, after completing a basic firearm safety course just 3 weeks earlier. With hunting season approaching and plans to join his father-in-law on his first hunting trip, Michael was eager to improve his shooting skills. That Saturday afternoon, the private outdoor range sat empty under the Montana sky, with no range safety officer present to supervise. Michael had been practicing for over an hour, feeling increasingly confident with each shot. However, despite his recent training, he had developed dangerous habits from watching too many action movies, including the deadly practice of keeping his finger on the trigger while handling his weapon. At 3:20 p.m., after finishing his target practice, Michael decided to clean his pistol at the shooting bench. This routine maintenance should have been straightforward, but Michael made a critical error that would prove fatal. He removed the magazine from his Glock but failed to perform the most basic safety check, ensuring no round remained chambered in the barrel. As he began the disassembly process, Michael struggled with the unfamiliar mechanism. To get a better angle on the disassembly lever, he pointed the muzzle directly toward his chest. His finger remained dangerously positioned on the trigger as he applied increasing pressure, fighting with the stubborn components. The chambered 9mm hollow point round fired without warning, the muzzle flash searing his shirt as the bullet entered just below his sternum at point-blank range. The hollow point ammunition performed exactly as designed, expanding rapidly as it tore through his diaphragm and into his heart. The devastating projectile ripped through his left ventricle, creating massive internal damage before exiting through his back with a 2-inch wound. Michael dropped the smoking pistol and staggered backward, blood pouring from both entry and exit wounds. His heart, now filling rapidly with blood, began failing within seconds. Cardiac tamponade set in as the blood-filled pericardium prevented his heart from beating effectively. Within 30 seconds, he collapsed in cardiac arrest, his body shutting down from catastrophic blood loss. 20 minutes later, a neighboring rancher investigating the gunshot discovered Michael's lifeless body sprawled beside the shooting bench. The scene told the tragic story: a loaded weapon, an empty magazine nearby, and blood pooling beneath the victim who had violated every fundamental rule of gun safety. Michael's eagerness to practice had been overshadowed by his failure to respect the deadly potential of his weapon. In his rush to become proficient, he had forgotten the most important lesson from his safety course: treat every gun as if it's loaded, because sometimes it is. It was March 22, 2020, when David Rodriguez's determination to prove himself would cost him everything. David, a 43-year-old accountant from Richmond, Virginia, had always been the numbers guy, precise, methodical, and proud of his attention to detail. But when COVID-19 swept through the economy and his firm laid him off after 15 years, his world turned upside down. His wife Maria had been asking him to finish their garage renovation for 3 years, and now, with time on his hands and his pride wounded, David saw this as his chance to show he was more than just a man who pushed papers. For weeks, David immersed himself in YouTube tutorials, watching video after video about framing, drywall, and construction techniques. His confidence grew with each tutorial. He started telling Maria he was basically a professional contractor now, dismissing her suggestions to hire someone, or at least get help from their neighbor Tom, who actually worked construction. The stubborn streak that made David excellent at balancing books also made him refuse assistance. This was his project, his chance to prove his worth beyond spreadsheets and tax returns. When Tom offered to lend him a pneumatic nail gun, David jumped at the opportunity, though he'd never used power tools beyond a basic drill. That Sunday morning, David set up in the garage with his borrowed equipment. The compressor hummed loudly, set to maximum pressure at 120 psi. David figured more power meant better results. He never bothered reading the manual. After all, how complicated could pointing and shooting be? At 10:15 a.m., David positioned himself awkwardly beside a 2x4 stud he was trying to attach to the garage wall. Holding the board steady with his left hand, he stretched around it with the nail gun, trying to nail from the front at an uncomfortable angle. His methodical nature had abandoned him in favor of impatience and overconfidence. The moment David pulled the trigger, the excessive air pressure caused the tool to kick back violently. The gun bounced off the wood surface and fired again, this time sending a 3.5-inch framing nail directly into his chest. The nail penetrated his sternum and tore through his heart's left ventricle. Blood immediately began filling the pericardial sac surrounding his heart, creating a condition called cardiac tamponade. David's heart couldn't beat effectively as pressure built around it. He staggered backward, the nail gun clattering to the concrete floor as he clutched his chest in shock and confusion. David collapsed against his workbench, sending paint cans and tools crashing to the ground. His meticulous nature, which had served him so well in accounting, couldn't help him now as his heart went into arrest. Within 90 seconds, his blood pressure dropped to 0, and consciousness slipped away. Maria found him 2 hours later when she brought his favorite sandwich for lunch. The paramedics arrived within 6 minutes of her frantic call, but despite their advanced life support measures, David couldn't be revived. The medical examiner later determined the nail had created a 2-inch tear in his heart muscle, an instantly fatal injury. OSHA investigators discovered multiple safety violations at the scene, including the dangerously high air pressure setting and David's lack of proper safety equipment. The incident prompted manufacturers to add new warnings about pressure settings on pneumatic nail gun packaging. David Rodriguez, who had spent his career ensuring every number added up perfectly, had made one calculation error that cost him everything. His desire to prove himself as more than just an accountant had ended in a suburban garage, surrounded by the tools of a trade he'd never truly learned to respect. The man who could balance million-dollar budgets couldn't balance his own safety with his pride. It was 1995 in Poland, and a tragic and bizarre event occurred that left the entire country stunned. Krzysztof Asninski, a 30-year-old farmer, lost his life in a shocking attempt to prove his manliness. Krzysztof was known in his village as a strong and hardworking man. He spent most of his days tending to his farm, doing the tough physical labor that defined his life. Like many men in his community, Krzysztof enjoyed spending his evenings with friends, sharing drinks and talking about life. On one cold winter night, what began as a normal gathering among friends turned into something much darker. That evening, Krzysztof and his friends met in a small barn on his property. The group was drinking heavily, and as the night wore on, their conversation took a dangerous turn. It wasn't unusual for them to play what they called men's games, but these games were far from harmless. They were competitive, risky, and fueled by a need to prove who was the toughest among them. The night started with the men hitting each other on the head with frozen turnips, collapse. It was painful, but in their minds it was a test of strength and endurance. Laughter echoed through the barn, but underneath it there was a tension, a silent competition that no one wanted to lose. They were driven by pride, each man trying to show he could take more pain than the others. But things took a terrifying turn when one of Christoph's friends decided to up the stakes. He grabbed a chainsaw that had been lying around and, in a shocking move, cut off the end of his own foot. The barn fell silent as the reality of what he had done sank in. Blood poured from his wound, but instead of stopping the madness, it seemed to urge the others to do more. Christoph, feeling the pressure not to be outdone, made a decision that would cost him his life. In his drunken state, he believed he had to prove that he was even tougher than his friend. He took the chainsaw, looked at his friends and shouted, "Watch this then." With those words, he swung the chainsaw at his own head. The scene that followed was horrifying. The chainsaw cut through Christoph's neck, severing his head from his body. He died instantly, his body collapsing to the ground as his friends watched in shock and disbelief. The reality of what had just happened hit them hard. Their friend was dead, and nothing could bring him back. The news of Christoph Asninski's death quickly spread beyond the village. People couldn't believe the lengths he had gone to in order to prove his manhood. It wasn't long before his story was included in a study published in the British Medical Journal. This study looked at people who had died in foolish ways and found that the majority were men. The researchers suggested that men are often more willing to take unnecessary risks to prove themselves, especially when alcohol is involved. Christoph's death was also mentioned in connection with the Darwin Awards, a darkly humorous honor given to people who die in the most foolish ways, effectively removing themselves from the gene pool. His story stood out as one of the most extreme examples of toxic masculinity and the deadly consequences it can have. Looking back at what happened that night, it's impossible not to wonder what could have been different. What if Christoph and his friends hadn't been drinking so much? What if someone had stopped the games before they got out of hand? In the end, no amount of pride is worth the cost of a life. It was November 8th, 2019, when Kevin Martinez's obsession with bathroom efficiency turned his Portland apartment into a death trap. The 31-year-old freelance writer had always been different. While his neighbors called maintenance for simple fixes, Kevin preferred elaborate DIY solutions that often created bigger problems. His bathroom had become a testament to this philosophy. A maze of extension cords snaking across wet tiles, power strips balanced precariously on the sink edge, and a tablet suspended from the ceiling by a complex rigging system he'd fashioned from coat hangers and dental floss. For months, Kevin had ignored the steady drip from his bathroom ceiling, despite the obvious electrical hazard it created. His landlord had been trying to schedule repairs, but Kevin refused all maintenance visits, convinced he could solve everything himself. The leak had grown worse, creating a perpetual puddle near his makeshift charging station where he powered multiple devices during his extended bathroom sessions. Kevin had been constipated for 3 days, and his solution was typically overcomplicated. He'd positioned his tablet at the perfect angle for reading, arranged a cup of coffee within arm's reach on the sink, and even installed a small fan to improve air circulation. The bathroom resembled a bizarre command center more than a place for basic human needs. That Friday morning, everything went wrong simultaneously. While adjusting his tablet's position for better lighting, Kevin's elbow caught the coffee cup. The hot liquid cascaded directly onto the power strip below, sending sparks flying across the small space. The electrical surge ignited a roll of toilet paper hanging directly above the outlet. Kevin shot up in panic, but his sudden movement tangled him in the web of cords suspending his tablet. As he struggled to free himself, the burning toilet paper dropped onto his synthetic bathrobe. The cheap material caught fire instantly, flames racing up the fabric toward his chest and arms. Desperate to reach the shower, Kevin lunged forward but caught his foot in a loop of extension cord. He crashed headfirst into the toilet bowl with a sickening crack. The impact knocked him unconscious immediately, leaving him helpless as flames consumed his upper body. The fire spread quickly through the cord-filled bathroom. By the time firefighters arrived, Kevin was beyond saving. The first responders stood bewildered at the scene, trying to piece together how someone could create such a dangerous setup in such a small space. The investigation revealed Kevin's elaborate bathroom contraption in all its deadly detail. His landlord faced immediate lawsuits when other tenants discovered similar electrical violations throughout the building, a pattern of deferred maintenance that had created hazardous conditions in multiple units. Neighbors later revealed Kevin's history of bizarre modifications throughout his apartment. He'd rigged his kitchen faucet with a pulley system and installed motion sensors in his bedroom closet. His need to overcomplicate simple tasks had become legendary in the building. Kevin Martinez died because he couldn't accept that sometimes the simplest solution is asking for help. His determination to solve every problem himself transformed a basic bathroom into a fire hazard that claimed his life in the most preventable way imaginable. It was August 14, 2023, when Troy Mitchell's overconfidence turned a routine cleanup into a deadly mistake. The 31-year-old tree service worker had spent over a decade mastering his craft, earning respect throughout rural Virginia for his precision with dangerous equipment. Troy was known for his meticulous safety standards on job sites, always insisting his crew follow proper protocols to the letter. That sweltering afternoon, Troy surveyed storm damage in his wooded backyard. Several beer cans sat empty on his porch as he assessed a massive oak branch suspended 15 feet overhead, caught precariously in another tree's limbs. His usual methodical approach had been compromised by alcohol and the desire to save money by working alone instead of calling his regular crew. Troy's personality shifted when working his own property. The same man who demanded safety harnesses and proper rigging techniques at work became reckless at home. He grabbed his well-worn chainsaw, ignoring the low bar oil warning light that flickered ominously. The equipment that had been his trusted companion for years was about to become his executioner. At 4:45 p.m., Troy positioned himself directly beneath the hanging branch, violating every safety rule he enforced professionally. He pulled the starter cord, and the familiar roar of the two-stroke engine filled the humid air. Reaching awkwardly overhead, he pressed the spinning chain against the trapped wood. The physics of the situation worked against him instantly. The awkward angle caused the chain to bind in the dense oak, creating the most dangerous scenario in chainsaw operation. Kickback. The saw's nose caught and Newton's laws took over with devastating efficiency. The chainsaw erupted backward with tremendous force, the spinning chain racing toward Troy's exposed neck at 30 miles per hour. His reflexes, dulled by alcohol and compromised by the awkward position, failed him completely. The razor-sharp chain struck his throat with surgical precision, severing his carotid artery and tearing through his trachea. Blood erupted from the wound in rhythmic spurts, painting the fallen leaves crimson. Troy's hands instinctively reached for his neck as the chainsaw tumbled from his grasp, its engine still screaming. The arterial bleeding was catastrophic, draining his body's 5-liter blood supply with terrifying speed. Within 90 seconds, Troy's vision darkened as his brain starved for oxygen. His knees buckled, and he collapsed among the scattered branches he had been clearing. The chainsaw finally sputtered to silence, leaving only the sound of blood pooling on dry earth. Troy's body fought desperately against the inevitable, but physics had already determined the outcome. The severed artery continued pumping his life away until his heart finally stopped beating 4 minutes after the initial kickback. 20 minutes later, his neighbor investigated the abrupt silence. The discovery scene was horrific. Troy's lifeless body surrounded by blood-soaked leaves, the chainsaw lying nearby like a discarded weapon. Paramedics arrived within minutes of the 911 call, but their advanced life support equipment was useless against such massive blood loss. Troy had been dead for nearly half an hour, his body already cooling in the Virginia heat. The investigation revealed a tragic irony. The same man who preached chainsaw safety had died violating every protocol he enforced. His employer, devastated by the loss, implemented new policies requiring safety equipment, even for off-duty use. Troy's wife discovered his body had lost nearly 3 quarts of blood, emphasizing the severity of arterial wounds. His death became a cautionary tale throughout the tree service industry, proving that experience without proper precautions means nothing when physics and human error collide with fatal consequences. Thanks for watching. Don't stop here. Click the video on your screen now for more unbelievably stupid deaths.